PhD in science. I'm probably the greenest Republican on Capitol Hill. That's not a very steep hill to climb, by the way, but I'm probably the greenest Republican. And probably because I'm a scientist and a farmer, and I know how much nature matters and how close we really are to nature, whether you understand it or not. You just look at the corn crop out in the Midwest this year, you see how close we are to nature. It was shriveled up, the corn was about that high and shriveled out.
Well, I'm speaking more like landfills, states.
Oh, well, years and years ago, there was a book by Vance Packard called The Waste Makers. And it's interesting, you may haul as big a bag out to the trash as you haul into the store. The packaging just is a huge quantities in it. Obviously, you've got to do something with this material. If you, when you go to Europe, people just they don't have plastic bags or paper bags at the grocery store. If you don't bring a bag, you carry it home. And I see them in France with a big long loaf of bread into their arms and going home. Yeah, we have lots and lots of trash, and you've got to do something with it. And obviously, the first thing you ought to do with it is recycle it if you can. If it makes sense, you ought to recycle it. What you can't recycle, and I have no position on the waste to energy, except that all the facts ought to be on the table. If it's economically sustainable, it's probably a good idea to turn it into energy. But if you don't, the only other thing you can do is put it in a landfill. Don't you have those three options for trash? You can recycle it, you can waste to energy, or you can put it in a landfill. Well, of course you can incinerate it, but I don't know that very many people believe that just plain incineration, getting nothing from it, is a better idea than putting it in a landfill. But it all ends up the same way. At the end of the day, in the landfill, it's all going to break down. It's going to have the CO2. It's going to have this methane. If you don't collect the methane, it's a huge greenhouse gas. I mean, 20 sometimes more effective than CO2, for instance, which is why they collected at landfill. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on the last election, I happened to have gotten a call for your telephone town hall meeting. I was a little concerned, more than a little concerned. You made a statement that it's not true that the uninsured don't have health care. They have emergency rooms. Emergency room is not health care. Do you know the difference?
Yeah, you're right, sir. I usually distinguish between sick care and health care. You're exactly right. We have a really, really good sick care system in our country. We don't have a very good health care system. And most insurance policies really don't have much to do with health care. They won't even give you a physical. It's like buying a car, and the guy said, don't worry about putting oil in it. If it breaks down, we'll fix it. I was teaching medical school in California in 1952, when the first HMO, Kaiser Permanente, started. The HMOs today are nothing like Kaiser Permanente was then. Kaiser Permanente may have changed. I don't know what it is today. But what it was then was, in effect, a giant group practice. And their members spend about half as many days in a hospital as the average person. And they require, as I remember, a yearly physical. Now, this was 1952. This was a long time ago. By the way, this is the 60th anniversary of my doctorate. I got my doctorate in 1952, and immediately went to teach medical school at out in California. And way back then, I went to one of their big facilities where they had a lot of automation. I remember a big jig that had hundreds of test tubes in there, and they were doing testing the blood and urine from the patients. And this was a true HMO, health maintenance organization. That's what the term says, doesn't it? And I understand that in China, you paid your doctor when you were well. If you got sick, GE failed you, and how can you pay when you can't work? That's not a bad idea, is it? Yeah, we have a really, really good sick care system. We don't have a very good health care system in our country. Bad terminology, thank you for correcting.
If I can follow up on that, actually the Affordable Health Care Act does institute some reforms that will address that, including preventive care. We have a number of preventive care services now under Medicare. And also it calls for a physician payment advisory committee that will look at what is necessary, what is not necessary. We spend 18% of our gross domestic product in healthcare. We talk about a budget buster. I think healthcare is one of the biggest budget busters there
Growing
is.
2 to 3 times the rate of inflation. If we don't tame it, it will eventually vary.
And we have people who live less longer than our neighbors in Canada, for example, by 3 years. We're 35th in the world on a number of healthcare outcomes. I worked in Appalachia for 25 years and saw women literally die from breast cancer because we screened them for mammograms, but they were uninsured working women. They had no insurance. They could barely put food on the table. They made minimum wage. They went to the emergency room to die because nobody would take them without insurance, a surgeon or the hospital. They die, and there are 50,000 Americans every year who die due to lack of health insurance.
Yeah, wait, clearly everybody should have health care and preventive. It should be health care.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't need as much sick care if we had better health care, would we?
And we know how to do it, but I guess the special interests, primarily the insurance companies, have seemed to, and it seems to me if we can reform Medicare, the insurance companies, my experience has been, tend to follow the Medicare example. So we may have to bite the bullet and really reform it to a healthcare system rather than a pay-for-illness care system.
Insurance was set up to share the risk.
Right.
If your house burned, that would be really tough.
Right.
So 100, 1,000 people got together, they all put money in a kitty, and somebody's house burned, they got their house replaced with that. Now the Amish do it differently. They don't have any kitty, they don't put any money in. If one of their members' houses burned, they just go build them a new one. If their barn burns, they build a new one. So, and they don't have any overhead for their insurance, do they? But we don't all have those kinds of tight ties that we could do that sort of thing. But today in healthcare, what the insurance people are trying to do is they aren't trying to share the risk. They're trying to avoid the risk.
Precisely.
By cherry picking. And obviously somebody's going to pay for it.
Mhm.
You either pay for it by people dying when they shouldn't die, or you pay for it by people dying with huge expenses and the taxpayers paying for it. You're going to pay for it anyhow, aren't you? You need to do it rationally up front and recognize that we really do need preventive health care. Which is, by the way, one of the biggest benefits I see of health savings accounts. Where if you spend about $12,000 a year, that's roughly what policies cost you, about $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year. And if you took $8,000 of that and put it tax-free in an account which was yours, spend it any way you wish, that's called a health savings account. Buy vitamins if you wish. I'm really for preventive health care, by the way. Then for $4,000, you buy a catastrophic policy with an $8,000 deductible. Now, you don't want to go to that catastrophic. There's some meaningful co-pays in the catastrophic. There are no pays in the first $8,000, but it's your money. And if you don't spend it, it's still there next year. It rolls over. And if it's still there when you die, it becomes a part of your estate. We have to never, ever have a situation where you need to use it or lose it. You may have an illness in the future, you need to save money. Think of what the patient will do if it's your money. The doctor will order a CAT scan. You say, gee, doc, couldn't we learn enough from an x-ray? It's my money.
The people I served in Appalachia could not afford to put, I had a health savings account, I had cancer, I could not be insured, nobody would insure me. I was able to get a health savings account, it worked great for me, and I had catastrophic. But the people I'm talking about in Appalachia who made minimum wage would not have that kind of money. It's either put food on the table or money into health savings account. I like your point about risk. If everybody in this country had insurance, it would lower the risk for everyone.
Yep.
Hospitals would do better, everybody would do better, we'd lower the cost for everybody, but we have to have universal health care.
Well, if you give them the administrative cost of what we call health care today, which is really sick care, the administrative cost, many people believe, is maybe as much as 25%.
Try 30.
Cost. It's a huge cost.
30, upwards of 30% of some insurance.
You think is that okay? It's
It
a
is.
huge cost. I use 25%. That's
No,
okay.
it's probably a good average, but it is high, as high. The state of Massachusetts requires disclosure of administrative costs. Actually, it's as high as 35 for some insurance companies.
Yeah.
And Medicare is 11%.
So you go to the doctor's office, and 4 or 5 doctors in the practice will have half a dozen, usually ladies, because women do something better than men, by the way, who are filling out the insurance forms and sending them to the insurance company. There's another half dozen people that are nitpicking the forms and sending them back. This is just ridiculous. And the administrative costs just go away with the health savings account. You just take the money out of your pocket and you pay it. And you know, I do not want to give a policy to a poor person. I just want to give them health care. I want to give the doctor, the clinic, the hospital a tax credit, not a tax deduction, a tax credit for giving them health care. You know, I don't want them disincented to seek health care. If they're getting their health care through the emergency room, that's the wrong place, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's the wrong place.
And they don't want to go there. They don't want to wait 4 or 5 hours.
But there's nowhere else for them to go.
Thank you.
Because I would like to give the doctor, the hospital, the clinic a tax credit. Then the administrative cost goes away.
And by the way, a single payer would cut that administrative cost in half. I ran clinics, okay, employed 50 physicians. If we had 6 people come through with Blue Cross, they all had different co-pays, they all had different special referral panels. You had to get prior authorization for this one. I could process 20 Medicare claims in 10 minutes. It took all day to process 20 insurance claims. That's the difference.
Oh, by the way, even the president gets it wrong about health care for Congress. I have exactly the same Blue Cross Blue Shield policy as any other federal employee.
A federal employee with good coverage.
There is nothing special about health care.
It's wonderful coverage. It's the best.
The Blue Cross Blue Shield?
The federal employee coverage.
Yeah, that's
It's
the
fabulous.
same thing as every
Yeah,
federal
that's
employee.
wonderful.
The
Yeah.
only thing different, I personally, my family cannot, I can personally go to a military hospital if I want to, and I do.
And I could too.
If it's good enough for our service people, it's certainly good enough for me, and I go to Walmart.
And the VA is wonderful care. That's where I got my cancer
You
care.
have a question?
Yeah, just quick comment and then a question. Just so you know, I'm a financial analyst, but so
Okay.
I'm all about numbers and figures. If I bore
Okay.
you, please stop me. What you just were talking about, I commend you for what you said about insurance companies, because that's exactly what they're supposed to do. And when these insurance companies know that that's something they can't do anymore, which is what they've been sticking it to people for years, their profits are going up. Their job is not to make profit. Their job is to spread risk. And you just said that yourself. I agree with you, sir, 100%. And that's what was in the Affordable Health Care Act, and I really wish you would have voted for it, or at least stood up and said something saying, look, this part I like. Because again, you don't have, maybe there's parts you didn't like, but at least stood up and said, this part I
There are
like.
2 parts of it I can think of that I would vote for. One of them is pre-existing conditions.
Right.
The other one is if a kid is still going to school at 25, he's got to have health care. Why not keep him on the policy?
But I
And
wish
preventive
you
care.
would have been more vocal about it, because again, people who are out here with average people think, okay, he's just towing the line and he doesn't really care. I'm glad you said that. I mean, it makes me feel good that you at least recognize that part about insurance
yeah.
companies. My question for you is actually regarding Social Security.
Yeah.
I have some elderly parents. I have a father who's actually in his mid-60s. And you actually sponsored a piece of legislation a few years ago to give Social Security control to the individual, where they can invest the money how they choose to. However, in a Republican Congress, it was shot down. Do you plan on reintroducing it, or, I mean, what's your plans for it? I mean,
You know, Bush, that was one of his main priorities. He did a terrible job selling that. It could have been easily sold. I don't know why somebody didn't say, gee, this is a better way of presenting it. If you told the person, if you use an alternative health care, survivorship, you will never get less than you would have gotten on Social Security. That would have cost us nothing. If you take the Great Depression, which was the worst time in our history, and put it in a 20-year segment, there is no time that the market has ever done as poorly as Social Security in terms of the return on investment. There's no time it's ever done as poorly as that. So the odds that you're going to do worse, I invest in the thrift savings account. And what people are advocating for Social Security is no different, I think, than the thrift savings account. Broadly indexed funds, you're not going to be a gambler with this. How many different funds can you get? There are only relatively few that you can invest in. They're broadly indexed with a big broad base, so you're unlikely to make a huge amount of money or lose a huge amount of money.
how would you protect it though? I mean, when everything went downhill because the real estate market, because that, again, that's a concern of mine.
What
Because
we should have told them was that you will never get less than you would have gotten if you stayed on Social Security.
but who guarantees that though?
The government should guarantee
The
that.
federal government should be
Yes,
guaranteed.
yes, the federal government should guarantee that. You will never get less than you would have gotten this. We're going broke in Social Security. We cannot continue. Something has to
We'll keep
change.
borrowing.
Well, you're going to, again, I'm being the financial analyst guy here, right? You're going to have some people who are going to go absolutely crazy with investing that money. They're going to put in high risk because they know no matter what they do, okay, they're going to at least break even.
No. The law would limit how they can invest their money. You could not go out and gamble with it. You couldn't go to Las Vegas, but there was the equivalent of that in the stock market, okay?
Right.
No, it would be a limited set of funds that you can invest in, which were broadly indexed, which means that, you know, some will go up, some will go down, but it's very unlikely that en masse they're going to go down. The market, the broad segments of the market have never done badly over a protracted period of time, have they? Yeah, yeah. We clearly got to do something. That's one of the things you can do different. You clearly got to do something. You could raise the age. The truth is that at 70 today, you're a whole lot younger than you were at 65.
I think people live 6 months at 60, after 65 when it was
It's now at 67 now, it's inched up a little bit. Most people, they still think it's 65, they'll retire at 67. If we change it, I don't know what the age would be, but if you change it to 70, I think it largely fixes the problem. And about half the seniors will bless you, about half will curse you. About half the seniors really like their job, they want to keep working, but their employer, gee, you know, paying that 67-year-old guy a lot of money. You can hire 2 younger guys who are more freshly out of school for less money, but they'd like to keep working. Now, about half of the seniors dislike their job, and they're just counting the days till they're retired. They're not going to like you very much if you do that. But I think you'll about lose as many votes as you can with that, so I don't think it's a political issue. It's one of the things we can look at, and the truth is that today at 70, you're a whole lot younger than you were at 65 when this law was enacted. Other questions or comments? Yes?
Well, there's been a lot of talk in the news lately about, you know, probably one of your least favorite subjects, abortion. And so this leads me to ask if you would support, I know the Republican platform and Governor Romney have slightly different views on abortion for rape victims. So I'd like you to clarify what your position is.
Oh, it's been the same for 20 years. I'm pro-life, with exceptions for life and mother rape and incest. I'm so avidly pro-life that I'm against corporal punishment. It's hard for me to be pro-life and pro-death at the same time. Nobody ever asked me that question for about 8 years. And I was in debate over in Howard County, and Ben Cardin was there, and his opponent didn't show up. So I had my opponent and Ben Cardin both kind of attacked me. And this question came up about capital punishment. And that ended the debate. They couldn't believe it. I'm a pretty conservative Republican. And, you know, I read 2 books in the past. One was, boy, I cannot remember the 2 books I read. 88 Men and 2 Women, Aborting Laws. And these were the people executed who used abortion things. And the other was One Man's Freedom, Edward Bennett Williams. And in each of those books, there was a big, long chapter on corporal punishment and was it a deterrent. And I know of no professional who believes it is a deterrent. And it diminishes me. You know, I'm avidly pro-life. I reverence life. And it just diminishes me.
Thank you for being consistent in the policy.
Yeah, well, I'm pro-life. I came hard over with Carla Faye Tucker. You remember Carla Faye Tucker? How many remember Carla Faye Tucker? Okay, Carla Faye Tucker was a drug-crazed teenager who was involved in a hideous murder in Texas. And she was in jail. By the way, we plan and plot this execution for, on average, 14 years, and no other more premeditated killing in the world than executions in our country. We plan and plot it for an average of 14 years. Carla Faye Tucker became a born-again Christian. She was, in effect, a missionary in the penitentiary, and everybody recognized her. And I woke up the next morning and I said, who in God's green earth is better off today because we killed Carla Faye Tucker yesterday? And so I pretty much came hard over it. Some crimes are so hideous that we're right there. In a bit of anger, I could kill the person. I recognize that's kind of an ignoble reaction to it, isn't it? It's not that they don't deserve to die. It's just that, you know, I'm not so concerned about what it does to them. I'm concerned about what it does to me and to our culture. Yes, ma'am.
But then to go one step further, then how then, if you have somebody that commits a violent, heinous crime, i.e.
Yeah.
forcible rape,
Yeah.
which results in the pregnancy of the woman who was forcibly raped, what is your position?
Oh, life of the mother, with the exception of life of the mother, rape and incest. Yeah, I've always, that's a mantra, you know, I've said it so often, it just spills out. If you really, there are very few pregnancies as a result of rape, fortunately, and incest.
So you
Compared to-
agree with that?
Compared to the usual abortion, what is the percentage of abortions to rape? It is tiny. It is tiny, tiny percentage.
There's 20,000 pregnancies every year from rape.
You know, and how many abortions? In the millions.
That's 20,000 rapes, that's 20,000
I'm
people
not-
who are violated.
Yeah, I know.
That's a
But
lot.
in terms of, I was
That's
looking
20,000
at
too
the
many.
percentage of pregnancy, percentage of abortions for rape as compared to overall abortions, it's a tiny, tiny percentage.
And incest is quite high too, believe me, in Appalachia, we sell
Oh,
it
yeah.
on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah. But again, it's a tragedy for the family and the person, but in terms of actual numbers, it's a pretty small percentage of the total number.
Unless you're the one.
Yet most abortions are for what purpose?
Family planning.
Just don't want to have a baby. A second reason for abortions is you'd like a boy and it's a girl, or vice versa. And I know a lot of people are opposed to abortion who are pro.
How many children die every year from child abuse because it's an unwanted pregnancy? I started my career
Yeah.
in child abuse, and it was horrible. The research we've done at the University of Pittsburgh showed the #1 reason why people had abused their children is because they were unwanted children. So we need to have greater access to family planning, and yet some people want to defund family planning.
When I ran 20 years ago, I was a teacher, a researcher, a farmer. I built homes. I never had to think about this. And I really had to search my soul to see where I was going to be. And the arguments you were making, you know, I made them to myself. You know, there are times when the kind of a life that child is going to have, pretty tough.
But we need to have accessible choices for women so they don't get pregnant. We need to eliminate unwanted pregnancies.
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll find no bigger supporters after.
Thank you.
That's right. No bigger-
Because of those who want to defund Planned Parenthood.
Yes, yeah. Other questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
See, so what's your position on government policy for the rapist? You in favor of more punishment for the rapist, the criminal crime?
Oh, I shouldn't tell you what I think the punishment would be for rapists. It might not be politically correct. The Mikado, you know, the Mikado, and the punishment should fit the crime. Maybe you can divine from that, but I think that the punishment ought to be for the rapist. Okay.
I have a question. The national debt is huge, it's a big issue, but we're focused on rape. Will you bring the national debt
Yeah. Thank you.
to the attention? Because I think
Yeah.
if we can solve this problem, I think a lot of these other problems will go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, I mentioned that the last poll we did before our primary, more people were concerned about deficit and debt than they were concerned about jobs and economy. Jobs and economy is generally every poll everywhere the #1 concern today. If sequester occurs, we will cut the military about $50 billion next year. The military is about 1/5 of our spending. By the way, that would represent about half the percent drawdown that occurred after the Cold War and after Vietnam. So since defense is about 1/5 of our total spending, if we wanted to be fair, say, gee, we're going to cut defense, but let's cut everything the same amount, we would be cutting $250 billion next year. Those cuts are considered draconian and impossible. Those cuts would represent about 20% of our deficit. Now, if it's absolutely impossible to cut our deficit by 20%, how will we ever get there? When Paul Ryan's, when our present Republican budget was his bill in Congress to go, it was called the Roadmap, and only 7 of us signed on to that. It is a really tough bill, it really tough. And only 7 of us, I was one of 7 who signed on to that bill. This Congress Before it was the Republican budget, he reintroduced the bill, his roadmap, and 13 of us signed on. Again, I was one of the 13 that signed on. This really tough budget doesn't balance for 28 years. And during that time, our national debt doubles. And it only balances then if you make what I think are unrealistic assumptions about economic growth. He assumes 2.6% average economic growth. Our market doesn't like anything less than 2% growth. 2% growth doubles in 35 years. It's 4 times bigger in 70 years. It's 8 times bigger in 105 years. It's 16 times bigger in 140 years. Our country's still going to be here, I hope, 140 years from now. It ain't going to be 16 times bigger. You know, the resources to permit that kind of growth just aren't there. So by and by, we have been a very fortunate people. By the way, the first prominent person I know of that recognized the huge debt we owe to the discovery of fossil fuels and our ability to use them was Hyman Rickover. If you want to read a really fascinating prophetic speech, just Google for Rickover energy speech, and his speech in 15th day of May, 1957. The audience is totally irrelevant. It happened to be a group of physicians at St. Paul, Minnesota. I think it was probably the most insightful speech of the last century. Pull it up and tell me what you think of it, Hyman. Just Rickover an energy speech and it'll come up. Yes, ma'am.
You talked a little bit about your positions. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess 2 things are of interest to me. What types of bills or pieces of legislation that you've been a sponsor on in a major way? And my second question is about your working relationships in Congress right now and how it, no matter what the outcome of the next election is, I'd like to see a more workable Congress or a Congress that communicates, and I mean that across the board. So those are my 2 questions. Could you talk a little bit about the major pieces of legislation and communication style in Congress?
I'm on 3 committees. You can only have chairmanship on 1 committee. I'm on the Small Business Committee. When I first came in, I had a subcommittee chair on small business. Then I had a subcommittee chair on science. But the biggest committee I'm on is Armed Services. We spend half of all the money that's spent by discretionary spending. We spend more than $500 billion a year, and not 1% of the thinking of the average American or the debate in the Congress have anything to do with defense. We are spending half of all the money that the Congress votes to spend. And I've been chair now for 6 years. I was chair of what we call projection forces, 4 years, and then we lost control. The Democrats took over, and my very good friend Gene Taylor, Gene said that he and I, we were joined to hippies, and there was no light between us. We would take the committee in exactly the same direction. I was chair of the projection forces subcommittee. I have responsibility for all of the Navy and all the Marine Corps, and all of our deep strike heavy bombers. We are term limited to 6 years, so in my 6 years were up there, I was senior enough that I am now chair of the largest subcommittee on armed services. It is the tactical air and land. This is Army and Air Force. I have responsibility for all of the Army and all of the Air Force. We worked 8 months on that bill. It is a huge bill, and we spent more than $500 billion. So people who are on armed services are a little different than people on other committees where they have lots of little bills. But we have just that one big bill that we work on for all that time. Coincident with that was our responsibility to make sure that our country is always in the lead. And one of the things that we have done in the past, we're now crippled in our ability to do it, was what we call plus-ups in defense. Near the end of the year, when you're spending more than $500 billion, every program doesn't go well and money falls out. And near the end of the year, we gathered up that money and went to the Joint Chiefs and we said, if you had more money, what would you buy with it? We called that unfunded priorities. We call that unfunded priorities. And then a congressman submitted their requests, and they were weighed against the unfunded priorities and the technical value, and money was then given to do these things. You need to know that the president's budget is a year old at least, and some parts of it 2 years old, which means that for the last 30 years or more, all of the new technologies, really new technologies that came into the military did not come into the president's budget. Every 18 months is a new generation of computers and so forth. They aren't in the president's budget. So we were using what we call plus-ups. You probably heard them as earmarks, and they are fundamentally different in defense. An earmark, for instance, in energy, and every congressman wants to appear green, so they do some green thing. And our little alternative energy lab in Golden, Colorado never knows how much money they're going to have for their alternative energy budget, because they don't know how much of it's going to be raked by congressmen on the way to them. That's not what happens in defense. In defense, it's not taken out of any ongoing program. Money is made available because when you have 2,500 and some contracts, some of them hugely complex, really pushing the envelope, they don't all go the way you would hope they would go, and some get stalled and the money falls out. Several years ago, I was in Hagerstown, and one of my constituents, I had never done it, one of my constituents looked back at the plus-ups that I had brought. I guess that was just to the district, but not all 9 to the district, because if it's worth pursuing, I pursue it wherever it is that's going to help my country. It was more than $500 million of plus-ups that I had brought back to the district. Individual bills are, a couple of little things. One is that a handler of one of the military working dogs wanted to adopt a dog, and the military's policy was that they just euthanize them, they go through with them. That's a euphemism for killing them. And I'm an animal lover, and so I have a bill, and it passed the House, it passed the Senate, the President signed it, and now the military must adopt out their military dogs. They can't just kill them. Another issue that came to my attention was that if you're in a homeowner's, you have a condo or something, a townhouse, homeowner association, say you can't display anything, and that included the American flag. And the reason for that not displaying things is that whenever your unbridled personal expression diminishes the value of somebody else's property, you need to limit that. So the rule is nobody displays anything, so nobody can display something that's going to diminish the value of their neighbor's property. I couldn't understand how displaying the American flag was going to diminish property value. And so I talked to the top guy from the homeowners associations in the country. He agreed with me, and we got a bill through. And now, no matter what your regulations say in your homeowners association, you displays the American flag. But primarily, most of my work has been, for at least 50 years that I've been there, been in armed services, and that's one big bill. And it takes 8 months to do it. Okay, and working together. My first degree was in theology in 1947. I'm sorry. 1947. Started 43, graduated in 47. That is correct. My doctorate. This is the 60th anniversary of my doctorate, by the way. So, that degree in theology has helped me more in politics than anything else I've done because of it. And that you learn to love the sinner and hate the sin. So you now can differentiate between the person and the person's actions. And I have some really good friends on the other side of the aisle. I don't vote with them, I will approve of what they do. And by the way, these are not evil people. They wish exactly the same thing for our country that you and I would. They want safe streets, they want good schools, they want good jobs. They want a military adequate to defend our country. They just think that the way you get there with a bigger and more controlling government. I think that's exactly the wrong way to get there. But their intent, they're very well intended. I just think that they're wrong what they want to do. I have very good friends on the other side of the aisle. You may have noticed that the only 2 times that we tried to have some, how should I say it, comedy, TY, not DY, in the State of the Union, and people have been asked to sit with a member of the other party. And both of those, Nancy Pelosi asked me to sit with her. I like Nancy Pelosi. I don't like what she does. I think that what she's doing is hurtful to our country, hurtful to our grandkids. But she really believes that the bigger the government is, the better off we are. And so I value opportunities to try and educate her, because she does care. I think what she's doing is it's hurting the people that she wants to help. but that's not our intent to do that. Yeah, I agree with you totally. We need to put aside these partisan differences. I never put Republican on my campaign literature. I'm a proud Republican, proud conservative. But, you know, I want Democrat votes, and I don't want to give them a guilt trip vote for me, so I don't put Republican on my campaign. I want them to vote for Roscoe Bartlett. Yes.
Back on the subject that everybody's most interested in, which is the deficit
Yeah.
and the debt. Did your roadmap, I assume that your roadmap did not include any tax increases, or did it?
You know, it's one of the things I talked with Nancy about. But this shouldn't get out of this room. Can I say something?
Other than your video, we promised to put the video on the website, so.
Okay, I won't say it.
Did you get a brochure in the mail from him today?
I went to talk to Nancy. I said, you know, we're stuck. Republicans are not going to yield on this no new taxes. The Democrats aren't going to make any meaningful cuts without increased revenues. I said, you know, the tax burden is made up of the taxes you pay and the compliance costs. And the compliance cost is at least $200 billion a year. That's the CPA you hire, fill out all those forms. It's $200 billion. I said, if we had a tax system where we had no compliance costs, you could have the same tax burden and $200 billion increased revenues. Geez, you say, what would that mean? I said, well, this is a very progressive tax where the rich pay even more than they're paying now. It's a very progressive tax. And gee, what would that be? I said, well, it's a flat tax on consumption. We just tax you when you buy something. And I wouldn't tax things that poor people need. I wouldn't tax a basic used car. I wouldn't tax potatoes. I think I might tax potato chips, because I think I'd like people to eat less of those. I probably shouldn't say this, that by the way you tax people, you can modify behavior. You've got to collect taxes, and you may as well try and do something good while you're collecting them, right? But if we did this, you could have a $200 billion increase in revenues with no increase in the tax burden. And I'll tell you, I don't know how you would know that you had the same tax. It's going to be years before you can figure out whether you were paying more or less taxes. So I'd be on the side of probably going to err a little on increased revenues because we need more money. And it's going to be years before people can figure out whether they're paying more or less taxes. Talked to John Boehner about this, and he said that, gee, you know, but that would depress consumption if it's a tax on consumption. Yeah, that's right, John. When you tax wages, that depresses wages, doesn't it? Whatever you tax, you're going to get less of. You just pick your poison. Whatever you tax, you're going to get less of it, right? Yeah, people are going to try to avoid it. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'll tell you the biggest problem with the flat tax. You know the average income for a Frederick County family, by any chance? It's $60,300. That's the average income for a Frederick County family.
Yep.
How much do you think that a family who makes $60,000 a year, they spend, how much of that income on housing, food, clothing, whatever?
Yeah.
They spend probably most of it.
Yep.
Okay. Somebody who makes $600,000. So let's use your example. The number I've seen is 33%, 30% for a flat tax. So that person who makes $60,000 a year will pay an effective tax rate of 30%. Somebody who's making $600,000 a year, they're not going to use every penny every year. They're going to use a piece of it, but they're not going to use every. Let's just say, for argument's sake, they're living large, having a nice house. They use half of it. They live off of $300,000 a year. Their effective tax rate is now 17.5%. What you just did, 16.5%. What you just did is you're saying somebody who makes $60,000 should pay a higher tax rate on consumption versus somebody who's making $600,000. That is not, again, maybe they'll spend it eventually. That is not progressive. That is unfair.
Well,
It's not a fair tax. It is an unfair tax.
I would not tax the things that poor people need.
It's not a question of poor people.
If you chose to buy basic food would not be taxed, work clothes would not be taxed in my world. Okay, and now this guy that makes $600,000 a year, he spends only $300,000 of it. What will he do with the rest of it?
Probably save it.
Okay, he puts it in the bank. The banker is going to loan it to somebody to grow their business or to start a new business. If you think about it, there's almost nothing that he can do with his money unless he puts it under his mattress. He won't. There's almost nothing he can do with his money that's not going to drive the economy. Is there?
I'm not saying, I'm not saying you should not be able to do whatever you want to drive the economy. I'm just saying flat tax that system.
So you think revenues would drop?
It's not a question of revenues will drop. I mean, you're going to be taxing people who use more of their income at a higher rate. And again, I'm not talking about people who are buying, iPads or whatever. I mean, $60,000 for a family of 4 is not a lot of money. For a family of 4.
So what would you do?
I would not do the flat tax.
So what would you do?
This is first of all what I would do. First of all, you take $16 billion a year that you're giving to the gas companies and take it back. They're making record profits every single year since 2001. The gas prices in 2001, the average rate was less than $1. And you know what? I'm paying more for a pump. Everybody's paying more for the pump. But you know what? Exxon, BP, everybody's making record profits. What's going on here? Yet they're still getting $16 billion a year in tax breaks. That's wrong. Second thing is, I have a real problem. Again, I admire you for saying what you said about the tax breaks. But the fact that the Republicans have said over and over and over again, we are not going to talk about raising revenue, is foolhardy, it is childish, and it's immature. When I'm a financial guy, I manage almost $500 million a year in revenue. I'm not going to tell you who I work for, I will tell you that's what I do. $500 million a year in revenue. If I screw up, my company will be very upset and you will hear about it in the news. Okay, so I know what I'm talking about. But when I need to balance my budget, I go to my customer and say, look, I need to drive revenue, I need to also cut costs. I don't say I'm just going to cut costs, because at some point, I can't cut costs
I won't
anymore.
argue with you, which is why I'm trying to find a way to increase revenues and get around this roadblock that we've got. And the flat tax would be one way of doing it. There may be a better way of doing it. That's certainly one way of doing it. Yeah.
If we were paying a national sales tax or a flat tax, we would have more spendable income because we wouldn't be paying an income tax.
That's correct.
And I think that the difference would be made up in our consumption.
There are two problems, two things that are kind of sacred now. One is charitable contribution deduction, others home mortgage interest deduction. You somehow got to have a tax system that kind of that protects those two things.
Let's cap them in the first place.
Sorry?
Why should my cousin who has a $12 million house in Aspen, that's the second home, and deducts all that interest, let's cap him at a $10,000 interest mortgage deduction. He reduces his tax to 2/3 of what mine is, and yet he's a multimillionaire.
Are you sure that the interest on your second home is income tax?
I don't know, he's got a $5 million home in Potomac as well. I'm not sure how much that would take care of it.
I don't have one, so I wouldn't know. I'm not sure it's deductible. I'm not sure.
I love to swim in his indoor Olympic pool, but
Yeah, I think that the only interest now deductible is your home mortgage interest and business interest. That clearly is part of the cost.
maybe it's changed. But I don't have a second home either,
That
but
should be-
I'll take his tax deduction for his Potomac home any day, sitting
Yeah.
next to Bill Marriott's home.
You know, the thing that you've been alluding to, several of you have alluded to, is that phenomenon. It's not just our problem, it's a global problem. And that is the middle class is shrinking.
Absolutely.
The rich are getting richer.
That's right.
And the poor, sometimes you can't get poorer, but they're getting.
They are. Poverty's actually increased,
They're
yeah.
getting a bigger class.
That's a
And
threat
it's
to
not just
democracy.
us. That's a global phenomenon.
It's a
It's
threat
been
to
out there for a
democracy.
number of years now. And I don't know what the solution to that problem is.
What about the job creator? That's a solution.
Yeah, we need job creators, but you need more than, I grew up in the Great Depression. I was born in 1926. There was no welfare, no such thing as welfare then. My father was born in 1895, so my father's life and my life now, we've been in 3 different centuries. The 18th century, 1800s and 1900s, 2000s now. And my father's, his father, 5 brothers married 5 sisters. But to force the bucking, you live on a farm, you can't marry somebody you never met, and your field is pretty limited. Well, there's at least 5 good-looking gals and 5 men, and so 5 brothers married 5 sisters. And the thing that struck me was how many of his second, third, and whatever cousins were raised by somebody other than their blood parents. And that's because back then, the culture just required that if one of your family members, extended family, cousins, second cousins, fell at hard times and couldn't raise a child, you had to. You just did that. That's what you did. Today you don't do that.
Oh, yes, you do. Among poor people, you do.
Welfare.
You certainly do. How many grandmothers raise their daughters' children in the poor culture? If
But
you
the
live in
poor culture-
Appalachia, they certainly do.
They
And I
do
think
that.
y'all were probably poor
Yeah.
then too during the Depression.
Yeah, yeah. But,
They have no choice.
yeah, there was no welfare then.
No.
It was, people needed welfare and they couldn't do it on their own, and so family did it.
It's a different world.
It's a different world.
The bottom line is, your opponent this fall,
Yeah.
number 6, is John Delaney.
Yeah.
A proven job grader, an excellent track record, an investor. You say you don't want to remain Republican mentioned on your literature, but this is all I see. I checked it out. It's lots. I mean,
I haven't
how
seen
can
it.
he do
I haven't seen it.
reliable by giving them money?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, yeah, it's all over the place.
Well, based on the comment you made earlier about defense and being a veteran who has a service-connected disability
Didn't
and
come from our campaign.
gotten excellent care through the VA healthcare system.
Spread it around.
Didn't come from our campaign. I've never seen
Nothing
it.
checks out.
I've never seen it.
Let's go back to 50% of our discretionary budget going to defense, and Vietnam veterans saw incredible waste. If there was a carburetor broke, they ditched the Jeep because we wouldn't get it next year. I mean, the waste in defense is, you know that.
I
mean,
know that.
Yeah, and a jet that nobody seems, the generals don't want, but it's in some congressman's manufacturing district, so he wants to maintain the jet even though the generals don't want it. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. It seems to me we're there now. I worked in Washington with the lobbyists, and I saw the military-industrial complex at work. And you follow the money, the campaign contributions going to those folks, and then following how they vote is absolutely repulsive. I think if every American saw that, how it works, and you know exactly how it works, I think we'd all be up in arms. We'd have a revolution.
It's worse than Eisenhower.
Thank you.
It's not
Thank you.
just the military-industrial complex. The F-35 today is
Exactly.
built
That's what I was
in
thinking.
48 states.
That's right.
In every state except Wyoming, and I forget the other state. That means there are 96 senators who want to build the F-35,
That's right.
whether we need it or not.
Thank you.
Because there are jobs in their district. Yeah, you know, it is. We had a hearing in Armed Services on the economic effects of the sequester, because the sequester, we're spending $50 billion less dollars, there'll be less jobs out there. So when it came my turn I'm not sure they understood why I asked the question. And I said, you know, if when we went home tonight, we broke all the windows in this building and in every building in Washington. And a crew came in overnight and put the windows back in so we could work tomorrow. And we did that every day. We just broke all the windows out when we went home, and a crew came in overnight and put all the windows back in. That would create a lot of jobs. A lot of jobs. And my question was, would this have a long-term beneficial effect on our economy? And the point I was trying to make was that there are two kinds of jobs. There are jobs that consume well, and there are jobs that produce well. And that we've got to have a military, and there's no stronger supporter of the military than I am, but I recognize that almost all military jobs consume well. They're helping us to create wealth because we have a great free country. You know, the defense is not a jobs program.
Thank you.
It is not a jobs program. We need defense because we need defense. We don't need defense because we need jobs. So it's worse than Eisenhower mentioned. It's not just a military-industrial complex. It's a military-industrial congressional complex today.
Thank you. Exactly.
And where do you look for an honest broker? Who is going to, you know, the defense people, they want the jobs. The military want to make really sure they can protect our country. This new fancy thing will do a little better job than what I've got now. Let's have it. Every governor, and the military is in just about every state now. As I say, that plane is made in 48 states. And I think that that's not entirely accidental.
Not efficient either.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up, because I was a little confused about the your attitude towards the sequestration, it seems as though you're kind of in favor of a lot of defense cuts. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
Well, the sequester, there was the super committee, whatever they called it, was set up. There were 1,000 of them were supposed to find the cuts of $1.2 trillion over 10 years. If they couldn't do that, we were going to have a sequester that would do it. This is a blunt axe that just cuts across the board, although that doesn't have to be. That's the way the law is written, but we wrote the law. We can change it. I hope that we don't do what I think we might do, and that is just chicken out and kick the can down the road, because we are running out of time to face the deficit and the debt. About every 6 or 7 hours is another $1 billion increase in the deficit.
But how about the military expenditures? You're cutting the budget for the military?
Well, you know, they say that they've cut $47 billion. But it was a very interesting thing happened. During the debate on the floor, there was an amendment that cut $1.8 billion so that we wouldn't be spending more this year than we spent last year. Now, how can you cut $47 billion? And I asked Ashton Carter, number 2 guy in the Pentagon, I said, I thought that we were doing this cutting to reduce the deficit. Help me understand how if we're spending more next year than we did this year, that contributes to the deficit reduction. And his answer was, we're spending less than we wanted to. You got to be careful in Washington. You got to be careful. Washington speak is a different language. This is a cut in the rate of increase. It was not a cut in spending.
Isn't it the first time we've ever had 2 wars and never paid for them? And we also cut taxes during the same time?
We've done a lot of things that we could back up and do them over. I think we might.
It's the first time in history, though, that we've had wars and we've had no mechanism to pay for them. At the same time, cut taxes and increase the deficit, the greatest record.
World War
we've
II
had.
was a war of necessity. The
Yes,
labor
it was.
argued that was a war of necessity. We thought that Korea and Vietnam were wars of necessity.
Those of us that fought didn't necessarily think so.
With the advantage of hindsight, I'm not sure
Yeah.
they were wars of necessity.
Let me tell you they weren't.
I'm darn sure that the 2 wars, the one that we're just out of and the one we're getting out of, were not wars of necessity. They were totally discretionary wars. And I think that the average American has a belly full of discretionary wars.
The empire has to survive.
Yeah.
Long live the empire.
It's feeding itself. Yeah.
If Rome ever fall, I flunked that class.
Because of defense spending. Actually, Rome got overextended in their military, and that's what caused
It's
the
in this
decline of the Roman
hemisphere
Empire.
now. Build more roads. Empire has to
They had too many fronts.
Republicans love the empire.
Napoleon lost because he had too many fronts.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent analogy.
I asked Ron Paul why we had the troops in more than 100 countries around the world. He said, we're protecting our empire.
Good for
He
him.
said that. He
That's a
admitted
great-
saying that.
Ron said, oh yeah, Ron said that.
And he would.
You said it in public, I'm not repeating anything.
Yeah.
He was, by the way, he wasn't condoning it, he was just stating it. It wasn't,
By being
he
deceived.
wasn't, we didn't say he supported it, I'm quite sure he doesn't.
No, he wouldn't.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I have a question, and it's on a completely different
Okay.
track. It's on a local level. My youngest son has a great job. He's 3 years out of college with a double engineering degree, and he has a family. His wife has a great job. They're trying to buy a home locally, and the banks will not give them a loan. And yet, on my own street, in the last 6 months, 3 families have moved in who don't have jobs. And where are they getting these loans? I'm not gonna ask them, and I have no idea who's funding this.
They bought the home, you're sure?
They live there. I don't know if they bought it or they just squatted.
What you're saying, I hear from many, many people. The pendulum swung way too far the other direction.
Oh,
When
yeah.
you were given what they call liar loans, how much do I need to make?
Mhm.
That's how much I make.
Mhm.
And when they were loaning 125% of the value of the home, when they were loaning you money, the interest, the payments you could make 2%, you could barely make the payment. What the devil did they think would happen? You know, a few years later, when the interest went to 5%, what did they think was going
Which is why we need regulation.
Yeah.
We can't deregulate.
But, yeah, but, you know.
We got in a mess because
Why would a
we rescinded
bank-
regulations.
Why would a bank loan money that they had a pretty fair assumption was gonna go sour? They wouldn't do that.
Mr. Gambler.
You see, many of these, the community reinvestment acts
Exactly.
required banks to loan money. Much of this, that's right, many of these loans were required by legislation. Baltimore, those banks may not have wanted to invest in their community, but at the time that we passed that regulation, that was before I went to Congress, when we passed that regulation, the banks in Frederick were bragging. We give more loans to local people than our competitor banks do. So there wasn't any problem in Frederick about making loans locally. But there was in inner cities, and this was the law to make more funds available. But it got way out of control, and they're making grossly irresponsible loans. And then we got to, what did they call it? What was those loans? I knew a fellow who.
Well, people paid interest-only loans. They-
Oh, interest only, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
and even worse than interest only. He was gonna get another, what was the term?
Subprime.
Subprime loan, $60,000. He would only get 54 of it. They were taking 10% off the top. He was paying 10% interest. And he was gonna use that loan to make interest on the other loans he had because he had no income from his properties. He said, you know, this has no good ending. Well, you can't keep going down this road. It's like getting another credit card to get some cash on it to make payments on your other credit cards. And this was, you could do this. And of course, the whole thing came crashing. That wasn't just, it was a housing bubble in our country. But and it was kind of a double whammy. Oil $147 a barrel and the housing bubble was way, way out of control. So we've had a devastating recession. I guess, but except for the Great Depression, the longest recession in the history of our country now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's see, I want to get this straight, I'm not sure if I'm hearing you correctly. You said you're concerned about decreasing the debt and doing that by decreasing expenditures, but I think I hear you saying that you also want to increase the revenue. Is that correct?
I would like to increase revenue without increasing the tax burden, and you can do that if you can have a tax structure that gets away from the $200 billion of a compliance cost.
Okay, but if you restructure this so that you get more revenue, some people will be paying more and some people will be paying less. So you'll have some people tax more and some people tax less. How can you then sign a pledge saying no tax increases? Did you sign that pledge?
I and most other Republicans signed the pledge.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you are getting, it's not to me, it's a tax burden increase, okay? I'm okay with that pledge if I increase the revenues, but I do not increase the tax burden. And I think Grover Norquist is okay with that, too.
The tax burden
On which- on whom?
On the rich you're decreasing, but on the poor and
Well-
other people. There are some winners and some losers. You change the structure. And regardless, and when you change the structure, you have some winners and some losers. So you say have some people that are taxed more and some people that are taxed less. So how can you say and pledge that you're not going to raise taxes? I don't understand that.
Well, tax.
But I mean, I like what you're saying about increasing the revenue and balancing the budget. And I understand that, but I don't see how you're going to get there without increasing the taxes on some people.
Government Freedom Day this year was sometime late July. That means up until late July, every minute you worked all year long, all the money you got went to pay for the cost of government, federal, state, and local. If you have a zero tax rate, you will collect no taxes. If you have a 100% tax rate, you will collect no taxes, because if you're going to take it all, nobody will work, right? So somewhere in between there, and I didn't know this was called the Laffer curve. And by the way, most economists are pretty dull, but if you want to listen to a really interesting guy, Art Laffer is an interesting guy. Somewhere in the middle there, there's that magic number where the taxes are not so high that they depress entrepreneurship in the economy. You're getting the maximum revenue. And so you're not zero, you get no tax revenue, zero. You get no tax at 100% tax. I think that when the cost of government takes more than half of your working time to support it, that's enough. The lower 50% of taxpayers today pay 2.9% of our taxes. The top 1% of taxpayers pay 42% of all of our taxes. So we have a very progressive tax. A very progressive tax. Someone mentioned the oil companies, they make a huge amount of money. But the percent profit, and I'm no supporter of these subsidies for oil companies. I'm no supporter of that. But in terms of percent profit, they're not out of line.
Oh, no, they are.
With Walmart or the drugstore. They handle so darn much money. If you look at their percent profit.
It actually is higher, believe me. Their percent profit started out at 15% back in 2000. It is well over 30% now.
That's too much.
I'm just telling you, this is what I do every day.
I'm not sure it's that
Okay.
much. That's,
And sir, we elect you, okay?
Yeah.
You're a good congressman, you've served well. We didn't elect Grover Norquist. And when you pledged, I'm sorry. No, but listen to me, look, I don't know him from Adam. I don't really care for what he stands for. I'm sure he has his own personal beliefs. But I elected you, I voted for you, I voted for people to go and stand up and hold up the Constitution. Last time I checked, when you put your hand on the Bible and you're saying, I'm not going to hold up Grover Norquist, okay? Believe me. And again, look, I believe the Constitution, okay? I have my copy of the Constitution as well. It's a nice blue copy that I have at home. And I looked at it, and again, this is this is unabridged version, right? You know, what you want to call it. But look.
it's not very long.
But I understand that though, but look, you have pledged to uphold the Constitution, not Grover Norquist. And that's, I think if you really want to connect with the people again, if you want to raise Congress's rating, you got to say, Grover Norquist, go pound sand. I'm going to do what's right for my people, and I don't care. And here's my ideas. I'm Roscoe Bartlett, and I'm going to be my own man.
I'm pretty much my own man.
Unsign the pledge. Unsign the pledge.
Unsign the pledge?
Yeah.
Unsign it.
Yes.
Because it's an impossibility to do what you want to do.
No, it's not. No, there's another side to that ledger too, and that's expenditures. When Government Freedom Day is late in July, that's enough government, thank you. That's enough government. We
It's
don't
going to
need
be that
more
way
government.
regardless of how you
We need
balance
less.
things.
We need less spending.
But let's say find out where.
Yeah, we need less spending. Oh, yeah.
But you're also saying we need more revenue.
Sorry, if we.
To balance the budget, we do.
We need to
Eliminate
balance
that.
the budget. There are
Yes.
two ways of doing that.
Exactly.
See, I'm not sure, at some point, when you start increasing revenue, you decrease entrepreneurship and incentives.
All right.
And our corporations do corporate inversions, they incorporate offshore. We now have the highest corporate income tax in the world.
Oh,
But it's not an effective tax.
It's not.
It's
we
a
have
rate,
the
it's not an
lowest,
effective
the
tax.
second lowest in all of the 30 developed
Which
countries.
GE paid nothing.
That's
why
right.
you
That's
say-
exactly right.
That's
We pay
Yeah.
nothing. That's
And
exactly
they
right.
didn't cheat.
And Mitt Romney has his companies offshore and pays nothing.
Yeah. No, the brightest people don't always work for government. And the government lawyers are trying to figure out a tax thing you can't get around, but there are really bright people out there that figure a way around it.
Greed is
And these people are not breaking the law, they're just
That's
taking
right. No, they're
advantage.
not breaking the law.
They're taking advantage of what's called loopholes, but when you close one, they find another one.
Well, that's why the rich are getting richer and the middle class is shrinking.
I don't know what the reasons are, but it's a global phenomenon, it's not just.
When you can get by with paying a less effective tax rate than anybody in this room, which one of our candidates running for president is doing, there's something wrong. When, I pay 30% and I consider myself one of those average people in Frederick County, and somebody else is paying 13%, who won't release his tax returns, so we don't know where they're coming from. I have a problem with somebody paying 13% and saying, and bragging about paying 13%, when those of us who are middle class are paying 30%.
You have to do that with investing. If it's ordinary income, you don't have any choice. I mean, if it's ordinary income.
But most middle class people only have
advantage.
ordinary income. They don't have stock
The
dividends.
top rate is 35%, the state is 7%, that's 42%.
When your income's all dividends, you only pay 15%.
That's, yep. But then the argument is made that you paid 35% on that when you earned the money to buy the stock. So now you're being taxed again,
Unless you inherited it.
unless you inherited it. Unless you inherited it.
And you didn't pay tax
And,
on
you know,
inheritance.
in the Bible, there was a year of Jubilee every 49 years. No matter how
Yeah.
clever you were, it all went back to the original family every 49 years. So, you know,
Sounds good idea to me.
yeah, our confiscatory taxes at the deathbed are kind of the year of Jubilee, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I just wanted, I pulled the Constitution when I talked about it. There was something that I've always wondered what they were referring to, but there could be no better description, I think, of our regulatory agencies. And this is the Declaration of Independence. And these were all their complaints against the king and what he'd done. And this one, well, there's persistence. Okay. I have no idea, maybe you know what they had done, what the king had done. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
True freedom is when you choose to spend, not when you're forced to spend or
Yeah.
manipulated.
Do you have any idea what the
I
king
know.
had done? They said that. I had no idea what he'd done. But this was there. I thought this,
Probably built some new palaces.
yeah, I don't know what he did. He has erected a multitude of new officers and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. They had a way of words.
Sounds like the direction we're headed in.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Can I ask a
Yes.
simple question? Why aren't you in Tampa?
Why not in Tampa? Gee, Dave McConnell asked me that in WTOP, it may be on the program tonight. I have probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 constituents in Tampa, and I think I have all their votes. This is a really tough campaign. I think I ought to be out here doing what I'm doing tonight.
You can be a delegate automatically with your office.
You know, I went to one of these, I went in 1996 to San Diego. I'd just been in office 4 years, and I was a delegate. I put my name on the ballot. I was elected a delegate for a, see, who was I delegate? Who wasn't running? I still was elected. No. It was one of the people that dropped out. It was either Steve Forbes or I forget who it was. Anyway, you know, these are not nominating conventions. The nominations all set by the state election. And I just thought that we try to be servants in our office. If you come to my office, I never sit at the head of the table. I never sit behind the desk. And I think, you know, and we were partying on your dime, by the way. I had legislation for several Congresses, and they never passed it. They did finally do away with it, by the way. I think this is maybe the first convention that you didn't help pay for. So if they want to party, let them party on their own dime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is, but I have mixed emotions about it. I know Romney's going to speak tonight, and Paul Ryan spoke last night, and I don't know how big the audience was, but if you people don't know you, it gives you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the people. But I don't know if you need a big convention and party to do that. I think that
The electoral college just blows my mind. Have you ever read it? What goes on, what is behind this, the psychology at it? When is that?
well, the Electoral College,
Roman Senate.
yeah, well, I can tell you the reason for it
Catholic Church.
historically. The reason for the Electoral College was that before television, before newspapers, there was no way that the average person, rationally, there's no way the average person could know enough about the candidates to pick the best one for president.
You like
But
it?
you did know local people in whose judgment you had confidence. So you would elect the local people who would then go and nominate the president. That's not what happens today.
That's right.
Because the president is now nominated by popular vote. He is not nominated by the Electoral College. And so we've not had a good discussion of that for a number of years.
That's right.
There are pros and cons, and many states now have proportional delegates. That's really kind of violation of the original intent of the Electoral College, isn't it? But now, if we know more than we care to know about most candidates, don't we? yeah, it's a discussion that America might have. Do you go to a popular vote? The one thing that we have done that makes no sense to me is to elect our senators by popular vote. If you're electing everybody popular, why in the heck do we have two houses? They're both elected exactly the same way.
Checks and balances.
The only argument you can make is that Wyoming, that has about 400,000 people, now has the same weight in the Congress as California, that has, what, they have 52, they probably have over 100 million people in California, and they each have 2 senators. So that does kind of, it keeps the big states from trampling over the little states.
No, they had a thing in.
Yes, sir.
So Roscoe, originally, the way the Senate was supposed to be elected was the House, the House of Representatives in each state was supposed to elect the Senate. And we moved away from that. And I think what happened at that time was the states actually had more power, right? The state legislatures could say, these are the guys that I'm sending up to the federal government that represent my state. Well, now, the people in the states elect their senators. They sort of took it away from the House.
Except when they resign or something, and then they're appointed.
And then they're appointed. I mean, when I look at that, it seems to, and I know there was reasons behind that, because states weren't sending their senators up in time and things like that, and they weren't getting a quorum and things. But it seems to me that they actually gave more power to the federal government and to Congress versus state power, right? Where when the states sent their senators, I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that. Because that was the original intent, I think, was the legislatures in the House were elected by the people, but the senators were supposed to be, the senior people that were coming out of the House legislatures of the states themselves.
I think that by intent, they created a Senate that could slow progress. They thought that the whim of the moment might drive you to do silly things, and it might. And the Senate, it's hard. Unless you have 60 people, the minority can just shut down the Senate. Several months ago, this last Congress actually, because the Democrats were in control, I went across the aisle to sit down beside John Conyers. You know who John Conyers is? He's a long-time chair. In fact, there's only 2 people who've been in the Congress longer than John Conyers, I think. He's been there a very long time. And I said, John, I have this question about the Constitution. He's chair of Judiciary. I said, I have this question about the Constitution. I hope you can help me. I said, we use 2 clauses in the Constitution to do anything and everything we would like to do in the federal government. We use the promote the general welfare. If it makes things better, we can do it. And then we use the Commerce Clause. If it crosses a state line, we can regulate. Well, there's almost nothing doesn't cross a state line. Even the chicken can do that. Regulate chickens. And if it makes things better, then we can do it. I said, John, if that was their intent, if they wanted to interpret it that way, why did they put all that detail in Article 1, Section 8? Like post offices and copyrights and patents and bankruptcy and piracy. And then why did they put the 9th and 10th Amendment in there 4 years after they ratified the Constitution? The 9th Amendment, in effect, says don't disparage the rights that belong to the people. Fundamentally, all the rights belong to the people. And the 10th Amendment says if you can't find it in Article 1, Section 8, you can't do it. I said, John, if they wanted us to use these 2 things that we, to promote the general welfare and the Commerce Clause to do all these things, why did they put all that detail in there? And why the 9th and 10th Amendment? And John looked at me and said, I'm going to write you a letter inviting you to join the judiciary. I don't think that in his, how long has John been there? 40 years? I don't think he had ever thought of it. I don't think he had ever thought of it. Now, I'm a strict constitutionalist, and you may wonder at some of my votes. I really value the respect we have for civil liberties. When I look around, we're 1 person out of 22, and we have 1/4 of all the good things in the world. We represent 1/4 of those. How come? What's so special about it? It's no longer a work ethic. It's no longer our respect for the nuclear family. This year, almost half our kids will be born out of wedlock. It's certainly not our respect for technical education. This year, the Chinese will graduate 7 times as many engineering students as we graduate. What is it that makes us so darn special. And I think that it's our respect for civil liberties. There's no other Bill of Rights, there's no other constitution that has such respect for civil liberties as ours. I think that if we put at risk these civil liberties, we put at risk who we are. The only economic and military superpower in the world today. So you may wonder if some of Roscoe's voters when I voted against the Patriot Act. It may help you catch another terrorist. But it also, I think, may start us down a very slippery slope. And I just don't want to go there. I don't, once you're on that slope, I don't know how to stop.
Kind of picking up on that, 1 out of every 123 Americans are incarcerated. We have the highest incarceration rate per capita of any country in the world.
Far away.
Many of that are nonviolent crimes, marijuana possession, that
Yep,
sort of
yep.
thing. That sort of touches on that area of civil liberty. I mean, a little difficult shift there, but I'm just beginning. Yeah, doesn't that make one stop to think why we have the highest incarceration rate in the world?
I've thought a lot about it. There are 3.1 million prisoners in the world. We have 2.1 million of them.
Thank you.
You said it's one, I thought it was 1 out of
One out-
150, you said it's 1 out of
1.3 I just heard recently.
Yeah, we have a
126.
pretty representative Congress. I look around to see if we have 1 out of 123 of us.
I think you have a good number in there.
Frequently, roughly that. Yeah, you know, just that statistic ought to cause you to ask, why?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's frightening. It's very frightening.
Well, it's enormously expensive.
It's very
It's
expensive.
enormously expensive.
We could put that money into education, maybe those people wouldn't be in, and actually 1 out of 10 have ADHD. So we have kids who end up in prison because the school system can't meet their needs, and they end up without appropriate job training, instead they end up in prison.
Yep, no, I'm a big supporter of education. Every family in our country where a head of household has less than a high school education, whether they're white or black, legal or illegal, costs us $1 million every generation. $1 million. Wow, if you ever wondered about the value of education. It costs us $1 million every generation. It's a head of household that's less than a high school education.
But doesn't that make you question then how strong are we going to be with all of our defense if we're not educating our people?
Oh, I couldn't-
We will go down the tubes because of lack of
Well-
education. Defense is going to mean nothing.
Compared to
The next war is going to be an economic war. It won't be an
several years
intellectual
ago, they
war.
looked at scores, achievement scores in 21 countries, and we were thankful for Cyprus and Sri Lanka. They were the only countries whose kids did worse than ours did on the test. Our universities are the envy of the world. India and China have some darn good ones, by the way, but we're the envy of the world. We're bringing up the rear in K through 12. What in the heck happens after K through 12? Why are we bringing up the rear in K through 12? And we're the envy of the world above that.
And we're importing our doctors, our engineers, we're getting from India and China.
If you disconnect, you've got to ask why there. No. Yeah.
What's it costing us to bring those doctors in from other countries, bring those engineers from other countries? We're getting the best intellect we can from other countries, rather than educating our
And
own.
many of our companies cannot get enough.
That's right.
So they're incorporating overseas because
That's
that's
exactly
where the talent is. They can't hire them in this country because they just
But
aren't.
you can't have education and defense at those kind of levels at the same time.
Yes, sir.
It just occurred to me, your tax freedom day,
Yeah. That was Government Freedom Day. Tax Freedom Day is a little earlier. You have lots of cost of government that's not taxes, all those regulations.
Okay.
Unfunded mandates are a huge cost, yeah.
yeah, okay, so tax freedom and government freedom day. It occurs to me that that's an average day for all Americans,
Yes.
that's kind of
Yes.
sort of. But for some people, tax freedom day is early. Like for Romney, it came on February 1st. For most of us, it's June 1st.
I don't, what,
13% versus 30%? 13%, that's February?
how much you have to pay your taxes, yeah.
Yeah. So he paid his taxes, all, he had them done by February 1st. We're still paying into June.
But that's just his taxes, not that, that's his federal tax.
That's what I'm talking about, tax freedom day.
If you looked at when he stopped paying cost of government, I don't know when it would be, but a whole lot later than that. Your federal taxes are only a part of the cost of government.
It's the biggest part of the tax.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not the biggest part of the cost of government, because the
Of
federal
taxes.
mandates may cost you more money than the federal taxes.
The mandates are funded by
Yeah.
taxes.
And many times these mandates are not funded, they're called unfunded mandates, and they're passed on, like ADA, that's passed on to the states, like IDEA. When the federal government pays their full share of that, they're paying 40% of the average cost of educating these kids. It costs at least twice as much to educate these disadvantaged kids. But, you know, watch Washington and their language. When they're fully funding that, they're paying 40% of the cost of the average kid, but it costs at least twice as much. We have a kid, our youngest son, we have 10 children, our youngest son was a blue baby at birth, and he has a lot of limitations. And he went to Rock Creek, very special school, cost twice as much there. He's not our youngest son, we're 2 born after Fred. Ross is the youngest son. And this is an interesting story. Ross was an awful student. He wouldn't pay any attention. He just looked out the window. He wouldn't tell his mother when he had homework. She said, "Ross, do you have a spelling test?" And yes. If you practice it 10 minutes on the way to school, he got 100%. Every year, we talked to the teacher, he couldn't keep Ross back. He was just awful. In the 7th grade, Ross had a science teacher that he liked. And Ross now has a PhD from Carnegie Mellon. He went to UMBC, and I really liked that school. He went to UMBC. He was frightened because he was an engineering student, and all those Asians there. He was number 1 out of 180, but the genes lined up better. He's smarter than either his father or his mother. He was number 1 out of 185 students until Ross, you're too good, don't get your doctorate here. So he went to Carnegie Mellon, the best best computer school in the world. We almost lost Ross because he was just plain fool. His 1st grade teacher, I think, came to his mother and said, "Ross won't pay any attention in math class and he won't do the numbers thing, the number line." And his mother said, "Ross, why won't you do the number line?" He said, "Why should I when I already know the answer?" Was his answer. And I don't know how many kids like Ross we lost to drugs or whatever because he was just plain bored. At the bottom, we spent twice as much money per kid. At the top, we just were ignoring that.
Well, on the other side, I have a son who repeated 2 grades. He took him 14 years to get to high school. He's now a scientist, presenting at a research conference in nephrology. He was ADHD. It wasn't until we got him the resources, and we had to demand that we get him the resources, that he got the resources to be able to figure out how he learns, graduated from college, got his master's, got his PhD. He's now presenting at a nephrology conference. He was one that they said belonged in special education. It wasn't until he was appropriately diagnosed, thanks to federal funds, that he was able to figure out how he learns, and now he's contributing to society.
How old was Einstein before he talked?
My son was 6 before he talked.
Well, Einstein, I think, was 5 or something.
Yeah.
Was that right? I don't know.
Yeah.
History guy. Well, wow, what time flies.
Thanks, we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Anything our office can do for you, let us know. We have 4 offices. One of them is here in Frederick, Hagerstown,
And we do have
Cumberland.
privacy release forms if anybody's having a problem with the federal governments or agencies available and want to talk to somebody else.
Oh, yes, if you have a personal problem you couldn't talk about publicly, our staff people here, our caseworkers are here. They're just,
Based on what?
He
happy
thinks through things. He's not just espousing an ideology. I mean, I agree with him on his positions, but he has thought through his positions and come to his position that I can respect his intellectual process of his conclusions.
I don't think a lot of people in here realize that there was a minor audit last year done, I think, by Standard Security. They found that the Federal Reserve gave away 16.
Very similar.
Give me your name first.
We know what it talks
They
about.
need to be audited. Besides what's falling in that path, by the way.
How come no one talks
As
about
opposed to just telling
Well,
them
they
nothing
should.
about it.
it? How come they don't, how come you don't?
By the way, we never, we didn't ask. We have to talk about it, yeah. But we need to audit the Fed.
Shouldn't that be like number one on public attention? The 16 trillion that they gave away is 2 trillion more than our GDP.
The Fed just prints money, and then they load it to the bank and they collect interest on money they just, I don't understand the whole thing. To me, it sounds like counterfeit.
Yes.
Sounds fraudulent. It's quantitative. They're just printing more money.
Almost libertarian.
Is there something going on?
I still disagree with the fundamental in life.
They don't want people to know about this.
I wish
Just why we don't
people
care about it.
Every
people who are right here, so hands for provided.
The Fed is.
It's not a trial play, which is an
That's the problem.
because you're taking.
They don't understand it.
You can't take an oath to the king. That's like constitution.
They just hope.
You cannot take an oath to the country.
I also respect